Um, First of all, welcome to and thank you to Tom Yeomans, Andrea Bocconi, Piero Ferrucci, and of course Diana Whitmore. This event that we held in June was so well appreciated by everyone, and I know the four friends loved it so much that when we spoke after, we wanted to continue the conversation. So tonight we've got a really lovely agenda, and Eric will speak a little bit about it. I just say welcome from the three associations that are bringing together this evening, and that's the Psychosynthesis Trust. I'm Kim Schiller. My colleague Eric from Psychosynthesis Academy in Sweden and Stockholm. And the third person who's part of this collaboration is busy teaching at the moment. He's teaching in Basel in Switzerland. So Gerhard Schobel will at some point join, and that will be the third voice that you will hear.
There will be, as Kim said, three parts of this evening. And the first one is our four friends sharing. We asked them to share stories about how they have taken psychosynthesis further after their initial training with Assagioli, as was the focus on the last conversation this summer. We asked them to prepare stories about where they reached the limits of psychosynthesis, or where they felt the need to go beyond, and or maybe to find new applications or new methods. We will see where we end up, but to me, this sparks my curiosity to hear how we, as the coming generations of psychosynthesis practitioners, can be inspired to continue to evolve this work, because we, in our trainings, we so often say that this is not the truth, and still we might get stuck in, but this is the truth, this is the pure psychosynthesis, or whatever. So in the spirit of psychosynthesis, how can we all the coming generations of psychosynthesis practitioners keep challenging this work, keep developing it, evolving it in the true spirit of synthesis? And I know that the four of you have done that in different ways throughout your long careers. So with that, I hand over.
I think in the last gathering that the four of us had, I shared that how being with Assagioli when he died had deeply touched me as a 25-year-old woman, and how I took up his mantle, which to me was his vision to bring the soul back into psychology. And that's what I did. And I won't go into that long story, but when Eric was asking about times of doubt or times of wanting to go beyond psychosynthesis, I did have an experience when I was teaching a group of 30 students that was probably extremely horrifying and traumatic at the time, because I was standing in front of the group teaching, and I suddenly felt robotic. I felt like a robot. And I was just kind of talking about psychosynthesis. And I think what happened was I got a little bored with it, actually, after quite a few years. But that was a terrible crisis for me, because I was very identified with psychosynthesis, of course. But I also, in looking back now, can see that maybe I had reached my limits with psychosynthesis and I needed to go beyond it. And that robotic experience made me question a lot the transpersonal. You know, here I sit on this throne of glory. People come and want to learn from me because I studied with the big guy. And was it real? So that's when I decided to change what I do, start another charity, which most of you know of, which is working with socially excluded adolescents. But basically, I didn't know it at the time, but I was pioneering or developing what we would call today social psychosynthesis. And that experience, as I think I said before, absolutely gobsmacked me how transformative and miraculous applying the principles of psychosynthesis were in a social setting with young people who had no hope, no aspiration, had given up on life. So that has turned me into a bit of a social activist because, of course, I work with vulnerable, or my team works with vulnerable young people who come from very dire circumstances. And it's been just unbelievable to see how things change when we see soul. And it's not rocket science. It's not something we have to have years of training or degrees with. I train my staff if their heart is in the right place, and it doesn't matter what color, shape, size they are, or sexual orientation even. So I've been teaching psychosynthesis to people who are not on a conscious psychospiritual journey. And that's how I've differentiated psychosynthesis because, for example, I train Heilen local authority youth workers. And when I train them to deliver our program, I feel like I'm running myself into a brick wall and falling down and picking myself up again because they didn't like it. They said, "What do you mean we have to work with values? We live our values. Of course we do. We don't need to talk about our values." So it was a really hard training to deliver over 7 days. And the amazing thing to me was that after they finished and were back in their workplace, their bosses told me that their work had improved considerably. And the impact they were having on young people had improved considerably. So it was kind of like, okay, well, then, even if you don't like it, being exposed to what we all call the transpersonal has a meaning. So it's about differentiation of psychosynthesis. And for me, it's been social psychosynthesis where my heart now is. But I also think what is the trust on? I think it's group 69. I think that there have been many, many students and graduates of the trust who didn't want to be therapists. And I'm sure this is true all over the world. And those people are out there differentiating psychosynthesis. Those people are out there applying psychosynthesis to their work. And one example that comes to mind is a guy who trained at the trust who was working with sexual offenders using psychosynthesis. So it's quite wonderful that the differentiation is happening. I would love to get everybody together that finished their training and see what they're all doing. I think, Kim, maybe we should have a conference on that because I think it would be stunning and amazing. And also, I will say, particularly important to me right now is when I teach at the trust and I teach self-realization, I teach the creative use of pain, crisis, and failure a lot. And what's really important to me is not to teach psychosynthesis, but for the students to find their own relationship, to build their own truth with their relationship to the divine. So I'm much less of a theorist. I'm much less academic. I'm much less telling what psychosynthesis is, and much more, I would say, massively more evoking from those I'm teaching their truth of what psychosynthesis is. So that's about it. I think, Kim, did you just message me that my time is up? I think.
And I guess it's a conversation, Diana, and yes, let's talk more.
Yes, of course, of course. So I'm going to hand it over to Piero.
Okay. Well, I must tell you that I panicked before this evening because I thought, after all, there's no big novelty. I've been doing the same old thing for 50 years. And what I'm going to tell all those people that think that I have something wise perhaps to say. But then I thought again, and there have been several different evolutions for me. One was that I understood that when I teach and when I do sessions, I am a guest. It's not that person that comes to my house and has to adapt to my structures and my ideas, but I have to go at the home of that person, so to speak, and I have to adapt to that person and learn about that person and be in her world and see what's there, rather than give the techniques and the exercise and the ideas and the egg diagrams and all of that. I must say that even at the beginning, I felt a bit uncomfortable with that. When at some point I even quite disrespectfully told Assagioli, but you can't expect me to just go all over the place and tell your ideas to people again and again and again. He said, oh, don't worry about that. Every time we speak, we create something new, even if we talk about old things, if we infuse them with our energy and our conviction. So I don't use diagrams, and I don't teach in the sense. In fact, we got a bit into trouble with the ministry in Italy because, or I did, because they thought we were doing just lessons like the university. But instead, I will start with the students, with the people, and maybe ask them about the subject, and then build from there and see what we can learn together. I think through the years I've become less anxious. I would have been terrified maybe in the beginning of my work if I didn't have any structure, any notes to hang on to. But now I feel that I can trust the people, and before, usually, tonight may be a bit different, but usually before teaching or before giving a session, I don't know what's going to happen, and I will be surprised, because I think all the best things in life are spontaneous. And now I will hand the ball to who? To Tom.
To me.
Yes.
I love what both of you said. I just want to respond to Diana of speaking about the people who don't call their work psychosynthesis. I think that is a wonderful population. And when I think about a certain period when I was teaching, I wasn't teaching psychosynthesis explicitly, although what I was doing was based on it. Students came and they studied with me, and they went back into their work as doctors, social workers, whatever. And not one of them ever mentioned that they had studied psychosynthesis. They simply used it to enrich their work. And that was really marvelous. And those people are still at work. And what you said, Piero, about going to the house of the client and also welcoming the unknown, I think that those are both just completely essential to this way of working. And behind that is really that Roberto talked about it, and presumably we trust that there's a natural process of psychosynthesis, what he called psychosynthesis with a small p, which is built into the human organism. And if you really take that seriously, then you would say that every person knows what's right for him or her. And it's only a matter of finding out and helping the person find out. And the unknown has to be there in order for that emergence to happen. So I love what you both said. You know, I left psychosynthesis at one point, and I certainly was frustrated with it at other points. And those are things I want to say a little bit about. But I want to say before that, because I think it was clear last time, but again, seeing the egg diagram, seeing the star at the top, and I think I spoke about this experience, I found what I've been looking for. And I was an extraordinarily confused young man still looking. And that was really an epiphany for me. And then to come and work with Roberto was deeply confirming. So I remained loyal to psychosynthesis through some pretty hard things. And I just want to go on record as how grateful I am to have found my way into this discipline and this community now 50 years ago, and still be here and still be working now with the next generations. And it's just one of the deepest gratitudes of my life. So a couple of things I want to share. I want to share the difficulties, but I also want to just say a bit very briefly about what I learned over those 50 years about how to go about psychosynthesis. And one was to trust yourself, that psychosynthesis has room for infinite number of differences, even though we don't think so. And we try to reduce it to less than it is. But in fact, as Roberto said, it has no limit. So there's plenty of room for difference. And I think part of my learning was I tried all these things. I love what you said about the robot. I tried to be robotic. I tried to do it right. I tried to be smart, so forth. And eventually I said, these things aren't working. I need to really trust how I am teaching this material, this orientation, this philosophy, whatever. And I sense the reason for that is that our souls come through our personalities in entirely unique ways. So we have to trust the uniqueness of our own life in order to be able to express who we are. And that certainly goes for working with psychosynthesis. So trusting. Then the other thing that I realized I did was, and again, it ties in with Diana's experience. I kept looking for what was most alive for me, and I had to leave things that were useful and good because they were dying for me. And I needed to stay in touch with some aliveness, and that was part of the journey of sensing what idea, what part of psychosynthesis, what population, what opportunity, and then going in that direction, even if I had to give up things that I cared about and I was, quote, good at. The other thing, Diana mentioned this last time, I found that more than seeking out things, that I responded to opportunities that came. And that in the trajectory of these 50 years, I was offered opportunities that were maybe a little outrageous, or, for example, starting graduate school in Russia. But there was aliveness in it, and there was also, I was responding to what came to me. And Diana, you said that last time. You said, well, this opportunity for working with girls appeared in Scotland. What was I going to do? So think about purpose as a response as well as initiation, and being sensitive to what really makes you feel alive and is exciting. And the last thing I learned was just to embrace and love whatever's happening, even the hardest things. There's something to be learned from everything. So those are my tips. As far as the difficult things that happened for me, there were a number, but the first one was after being with Roberto, we came back. There was a group in San Francisco. It was very exciting. We did lots of good work in the mid-'70s in the United States. We were teaching in many different places. And then this group began to become more and more authoritarian. And it devolved, it disintegrated, it became very painful and a dangerous place to be. And I ended up on sort of the scapegoat side of things in relationship to the power. And this was an extraordinarily painful experience. And when I finally did extricate myself from it and the group collapsed, I write about this in Holy Fire. There's obviously more to be said. I could easily have left at that time and said, this is terrible. This is led to spiritual authoritarianism and so forth. But I didn't. I said, no, there's a vision here. I'm going to stay true to it. This was an aberration, but it's still here. And I set to work rebuilding in the United States because the whole system had been shattered by this event. About 10 years later, I ran into a much more subtle problem, which was I was trying to make changes and innovations. I was writing papers that would propose a theory change or some new way of working. And I was greeted either with silence, like no response at all from my colleagues, or I would get this adage, what's good enough for Roberto is good enough for us. And I ran head on into a kind of subtle orthodoxy. And this was so frustrating to me that I left. Now, I didn't leave the spirit and the vision, but I left the name. And I started the Concord Institute and I coined the term spiritual psychology. Of course, people were furious at me for that. I was abandoning them, so forth. But it was the only way I could stay connected with what was alive for me and the questions that I had about psychosynthesis. So I entered into a very productive period of teaching spiritual psychology in the spirit of psychosynthesis, drawing on psychosynthesis. And all the students who came at that time for 15 or 20 years, they didn't call their work psychosynthesis, but they were working psychosynthetically. So that was, those are the two most painful moments. And of course, the story ends well because I didn't lose touch with the people I cared about in psychosynthesis, even though I made that change, and stayed in touch with them, and then gradually began to find ways in which I could come back into that community. Everybody was very happy that I was coming back. I remember at one conference, someone saying, Tom is back. and able in the last 20 years to draw on, I mean, I made a lot of changes, but to come back into a connection to psychosynthesis. I wouldn't be sitting here if I hadn't, and I'm so grateful to be sitting here. So just, do I have a little more time? I'll take just a little more time. I want to talk about some of the changes that I made. One was, and this tied in with what John Furman had done about the primal wound. This came to me quite spontaneously, is that the connection to the soul could be wounded. So I developed the concept of the soul wound, and that's been very, very powerful and useful to people. Later on, I began to feel that there was too much emphasis on transcendence, and I coined the term descendance to balance out transcendence. And I began to look at the incarnational process of the soul rather than the transcendent and radiant process of the soul, again, holding both. I also moved, and I think Diana is saying this in her own way too, I moved much more into a process orientation rather than an analytical, theoretical orientation or even diagrams. I moved into working in the present moment with the emerging experience of the client and helping them learn from that experience and move to whatever is next. And I think the biggest thing was probably the shift to taking on consciously the planet as the context for this work and what are the implications of that at different levels. And that's when I developed the Corona process and group work to try to create coherent microcultures of peace, as David Bohm calls them. So that, I'm sure I've gone over the 10 minutes, but that's what I want to say. Thank you. Andrea.
Okay. Well, first of all, I sort of connect with something which is present in all of us, it seems. And it's the idea of not to be attached to the model, but to the experience, no? And work through the experience. I guess that many of my patients, they don't even know the word psychosynthesis. They come to visit the problem. We work, of course, I use some of our tools, and I have my idea, even my theory, but we don't need to share that. We need to work on the experience. And Assagioli encouraged me to do three things: to see patients too early, when I knew nothing, literally, to work in education and to write. And it was very interesting, my traveling around. I love it to travel. What came out from those experiences is the idea, the problems of translation, if you want. We know that when we learn foreign languages, there are some concepts that they don't work simply in another language. And that's very interesting, because they show that there is something missing in our language, no? So we could make many examples. But so everywhere when I went, for instance, I was very interested in the Buddhist psychology, because it is extremely refined, articulated, and 2,600, 500 years of exploration of the mind. And for instance, you can't, and I worked a lot with Buddhist groups. I am in a Buddhist center in this moment, and I give a seminar tomorrow to counselor. And in a Buddhist center, to speak of a permanent self is blasphemy. And the theme Atman, Anatman, there is a permanent soul. It's not permanent, just consciousness, flow consciousness, which goes behind. It's very interesting to me. It's very interesting. And I was really sort of fighting with this concept. And when I met Lama Govinda, who had met Assagioli in a crazy seminar in Italy, crazy seminar because they were both deaf, so we don't even really know what they said. Understood. And when I went to India, I visited Govinda, Lama Govinda, and I was on the edge of leaving psychosynthesis, leaving psychotherapy, just and so on. And he turned back and took from the bookshelf The Act of Will. And he said to me, that's a very important book. So I thought, if it's okay for Lama Govinda, who is a great scholar, the problem self, not self, it's okay for me as well. What it counts is the experience, the phenomenology, if you want, of the experience. We can call it values when we work in a company. We can, I like to say, what is really unnegotiable for you? No, for instance, speaking of values. And values is the experience and the relation with the experience. The self is the source of the values, but I'm not so interested. I think that it's a little bit like in physics. When you describe the light, you have two theories, no, wave and quark, and they're real, each one of them, depending what you're looking for. I think it's the same in psychosynthesis a lot. My experience, I've been working a lot in education for a Verso Foundation, and we work in different countries. So I've done training course in India, in Nicaragua. I've met in Indonesia, and always you have to change the language. and to find the point of contact. So that's very interesting because, for instance, if you are in a culture like the Balinese culture, which thinks that sickness comes from black magic or from psychological, you have to differentiate. I worked with an Indonesian psychiatrist. We invited her even in a conference in Italy, and she was teaching me to say, "Oh, this is magic. No, this is just psychotic." No, and so it's a different model of the mind. And then I was thinking, well, maybe we are speaking of what we call the collective unconscious, and there are different influences from the collective unconscious. So maybe we can reflect on the models. So what I got from traveling and teaching and working and learning more, for instance, you have done something in Africa with Verso Foundation, both in a training for counselor in Kenya and working in Burkina Faso. And what do I do with all the magic word around it, which I don't know? I must ask, I must respect, and I must find a point to not only to cut only to what we share, to enlarge to even to what we don't know, both. No? And my experience is that it was received very well, psychosynthesis, even in totally different cultures. No, so I thought at the end, some of the experience, we are born in the same way, we have to die, and all the things in between these two steps are the human experience. So on that basis, and with openness and not fear to question our orthodoxy. Remember, Jolie said there is orthodox in psychosynthesis, and I am not orthodox. And that reminds me when Jung said, luckily I'm Jung and not a Jungian. No? This is the attitude that we do to do. Where do I went a little beyond that? Mostly about the tools. For instance, Jolie was very interested to the autobiography, journal, and so. And I tried to develop a lot about writing techniques to use with people to grow, including mixing the creative and the autobiographer and so on. Actually working with educators in prison, and I worked with prisoners. That's another language that you must find. And it's so interesting because in the same group of prisoners, you have 5 or 6 nationalities. And for most of them, it's a second language. So the problem of translation, the problem of language is crucial in a global world. And so to me, there are points. Then I went back to the models to think, but Jolie has done just 2 models. So then they must be used and not just a theory beyond what we do. And so I began to think about the star of function mostly, because for me it's like the physiology of the psyche. To discuss the Jolie's star and use a tool related both with diagnosis, self-diagnosis, and ideal model. And we can work on that. It's very interesting to work with the star functions. So we can use even models. I went back to rethink what I have understood of the models. the ovoid give me more problems. But what I'm really interested is when I have a person, where he's speaking from, which is his life experience, which is his level of consciousness, where is invaded by something coming from outside or from inside. And I find very useful to use a lot of literature, because we create words through narration. We create a word, and it can be a positive, a progressive, or regressive word. So to work with writing, with the literature, which creating together a new story. To simplify very much and really to go to the basic thought, I think that when a person begins to work in therapy, it's because the story is not working. We are, in a sense, we are editors. A good editor doesn't change the story of the person, but creates it goes beyond some blocks of the story that make a bad novel of our life. I think that more or less that's what I wanted to say. I noticed that we agree a lot. I'm a little worried about that, but the point. I probably all of us we have nearly 50 years of psychosynthesis, a little less, a little more. What I am not, and it's beautiful to teach to the next generation because they arrive with more knowledge than we had. That's my sensation. They bring in a lot of things that we don't know, or we know very vaguely. And I'm not very much about all the fashion new therapies that comes. I think of something more deeper. So I think that what is happening to the four of us and to the other all teacher, and it's so bad that Massimo is not with us, that my impression that we are getting more free. Aging, we are getting more free. Still in the same context.
To follow up with what you're saying, that, well, it may seem that you are more free. This is a very common development pattern that you first learn the models, and then you go beyond the models, and then you come back to the models and evolve the models. So it makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like a natural process. But how would you, and this is to all of you, all the four of you, how would you describe today your notion of psychosynthesis as a whole in the psychosynthesis community? If you look at the whole, what's going on in psychosynthesis right now, how would you describe balance between orthodoxy and openness, for example? Because there is so much new going on all the time.
Thing that might be a segue is if I think about what the four of us have said, as well as what you said, Eric, about this process of learning the models, moving beyond them, then reowning them, so forth and so on. It seems to me in all four of us, there's a shift from a sort of conceptual orientation to an experiential one. And we've said that in different ways. And in terms of the new and the next generation, it seems to me it's even more important because there's so much new experience now emerging in people's lives. There's obviously things that we've not had to deal with before, like climate change, but there's also all sorts of awakening happening. There's a whole new technological revolution, and it would seem like a way that psychosynthesis could be relevant is to be an experiential context for emerging experience, learning how to pay close attention to that experience and as you said, Andrea, make the novel better, whatever, make the story better. But I found in my own work is that I started out very conceptually oriented, analytically oriented. And the big change is really moving to trust experience as it emerges in the process moment to moment, and assuming that the soul is in that experience in the moment. It's nowhere else. It's not off somewhere. It's not higher. It's not anywhere but right in the experience the person's having in the moment. And it's a paradox because obviously the soul is the context for the whole thing, but it also, in that, the learning from that experience is embedded right there. So that's one common thing I hear us speaking about. And maybe that's also natural. As you learn more, you trust your experience more. That would be another way to say it.
Something that really comes to me, Tom, when you say that is, I was looking at my old notes of Assagioli, and I found a note where he said, the inferiority and the lack of trusting self is often a result of the soul beginning to come through. And we feel inferior to that, that I can never be that big or that good. And when we have to be orthodox, I think that's what's going on. I think we're so insecure in ourselves that we have to force others to get what we're teaching because we know, or we pretend we know, basically.
Well, let me answer the question that Eric asked. He asked us to talk about what is happening in Psychosynthesis in different places. It's hard to tell because I think it's different in different countries. In Italy, I noticed, and I've noticed for some time now, that there is a conservative wing, so to speak. For instance, the Istituto has digitalized each single note of Assagioli, in each single page also that he wrote, he had typewritten. That's indeed very precious, and I think it's okay that we have somebody who preserves what was said. I think any community needs that. The danger here is too much devotion and too much rigidity, and turning psychosynthesis in some kind of road to learning of some concepts. And then there are other people that are more innovative and take psychosynthesis in different fields. Recently, we had the conference in Florence, to which our colleague in Ukraine sent a video, and he is working, his title was Psychosynthesis in Times of War. And it was an amazing, really an amazing lesson in psychosynthesis. He couldn't connect directly because in Ukraine, in Kiev, the electricity goes on and off because of the bombing, and so he could not do that. But the stuff that he sent was amazing, and we all remember that after all, psychosynthesis was born in times of war. It was born in times of difficulty, so it was new and it was old at the same time. And there were people talking about the work in prisons, like Andrea has done in the past, and now it's been done again, and different innovations and different applications. So both are there. The devotional, orthodox, conservative side, and the more innovative and spontaneous one. And I think they're both valid, and they're a good balance, in my opinion.
I do notice something in the trust students being around for so many years, and the students are more seriously traveling a psychospiritual path. They're younger, they want to know more, they're more demanding in many ways, but there is a kind of sincerity, I would say, an authenticity about their searching. And it's absolutely delightful to teach people like that, people that are not just buying the orthodoxy or not just interested in learning the theory, but really want to be the theory, really want to be the principles that we're talking about. It's incredibly moving to me.
I have that same experience teaching in this program in Florida and here, that they have this eagerness, and in a sense there's more sensitivity to the psychospiritual path. It's in the culture. At the same time, there in this country, and this may be more than Europe, I think there's just tremendous suffering and disconnection in the culture, and they're bearing that too, and in a certain darkness in the culture, actually, so that I think the spectrum of experience that they're having to deal with is broader, and at the same time their yearning, their explicit conscious yearning for some deeper connection is more powerful, and then everything's moving faster and everything's in a global context, because these young people, these training programs, the one in Florida has people in New Zealand, Europe, the West, the South. Zoom has made this kind of international connecting incredibly possible. Yeah.
I was thinking when it's such an intense time in those last 3 years, we had everything that we never thought before could happen. Starting with COVID, going with the war in Europe, with the risk of a third world war. And what happens when the field is so energized that both poles get energized and contribute a little is to hold both poles and to have a larger view. In a sense, even we are a little disidentified. We have done the things in our life, so we can look a little less identified in what is happening, and trying to be in and to observe at the same time. So, for instance, in the conference that Piero was mentioning, the last conference of the SIPT, the idea was when life enter in the room of the therapy, and it's not entering just in the room of therapy, all those fears, all those uncertainty. The world is changing every 5 years now. For instance, the market for new people who are looking for a job, it changes every 2 years. In the Department of the Economy, they say the market changes every 2 years. So what we have to learn is to stay absolutely in the center and moving at the same time, wave and quantum energy at the same time.
Thich Nhat Hanh teaches a beautiful, in his last book, A Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet. Absolutely beautiful. He teaches strong mindfulness. And there's a paradox there too, as Andrea is pointing to. Strong mindfulness, to have the eye, in a sense, really strong at the center, and to cultivate that center so that the individual, and maybe the group too, but the individual can bear and deal with whatever is happening, is moving fast or deep suffering or dislocation or confusion and so forth. And he speaks beautifully about cultivating strong mindfulness. He sometimes uses the word presence to be able to contain, hold, and eventually transform the chaos, really the chaos that we're facing. I think if you want to pick a concept from psychosynthesis, the I, the center, and its root in the soul is a wonderful one to build work on.
No one would deny that one, for sure.
I think the segue's begun very beautifully, and each of the four friends have started to talk about this. It would be great if you spoke more into the context of psychosynthesis in terms of the planet Earth, and really what the call is at this time. I think, Andrea, when you speak about the world changing, every 2 years, the job market being a bit different, this context where we simply don't know from one moment to the next who could have conceived that we would have gone through COVID, and it's still not complete. But I guess this next part would be really good to continue this conversation as you're doing right now, and just to explore more about what's being called in psychosynthesis, this freedom. What does it mean in the current context?
Well, we could start with non-dual psychosynthesis, because every one of the four of us over the years have come to this place of non-dualism with psychosynthesis. And that has helped me a lot in looking at the suffering of humanity and the global issues that we're facing. Because if we say that soul and spirit is guiding us and our meaning, our purpose, our calling, but is also within our suffering, within our tragedies, within our pain, this has given me a lot of thought about the collective and what's happening in the world today. And just as we in psychosynthesis say, that old story, the soul knocks on the door of our personality, and if we don't open the door, it doesn't go away. It knocks harder. And if we don't open the door, it tears the house down. And for me, what's happening globally is just that there's something trying to be born, something trying to transform in so many different arenas. And we're not listening enough. Not we, meaning humanity. We're not listening enough. And I think this is a really important area of psychosynthesis to develop more. We haven't paid enough attention to it. Piero and I, 35 years ago, used to do global psychosynthesis and try to apply the principles of psychosynthesis to global problems, to collective issues that people are facing. And we didn't continue it. I don't know why, Piero. I think we should look at that, because I know I've been saying to you recently, let's do this more, let's develop this. And you've kind of been, I don't know if we should do that. So it's a question I have, that why aren't we developing this? Because to me, it's a no-brainer not to see what's happening in the world as one big calling for transformation, whatever arena we want to look at. So it is, for me, it's something vitally in need of more exploration in our thinking in the psychosynthesis world. Piero, would you like to comment on?
Yes, I just didn't feel ready. That's the answer. The task is so enormous that when we're faced with these gigantic problems, it's humbling and we feel powerless. But I agree with you with the necessity of doing this. So maybe that's what our next workshop together can be, of all the many that we have done. I think there are a couple of things that I want to say here that are urgent, and they can be strong contributions of psychosynthesis. Always remembering that each contribution is just a tiny microscopic part of what has to happen. And one is changing our conception of the sense of beauty, because I can see that the beauty again and again is considered as lightweight and something that you can enjoy when when you've done everything else that needs to be done. Whereas I think that the need for beauty is a dramatic need in humanity. And it's only if we fulfill that need, we will be able to perceive planet Earth as sacred and to respect nature. Laws and rules coming from the outside, I don't think can do much until there is some deep realization of how beautiful is the universe in which we inhabit.
Piero, sorry, I completely agree with what you're saying, and I'm wondering, in the face of such seeming ugliness, how do you cultivate that which is beautiful in order to be able to serve in the way that you're describing?
Well, when I wrote my book on beauty, it is based on a couple of hundreds only, not many, but interviews, in-depth interviews. And I would ask people what was beautiful, what had been beautiful for them, and what effects did it have on them, bodily effects, mental, spiritual, emotional effects, enormous effects. And everybody knew instantly what I meant by beautiful, and everybody was able to find, even the people who were depressed and hopeless were able to find some time in their lives in which they had found beauty, because beauty can be found in many different things. You know, I remember one person just telling me that she found beauty in just looking at the dust in the light of the sun just floating in the darkness. And another person told me that he was serving as volunteer in cleaning up old people's skin and you know, bodies, and he found immense beauty in there. So beauty can surprise us. If we don't think stereotypically about it. And the big thing Diana was talking about, how, you know, what is this that's trying to come through, is to consider ourselves as part of a greater whole, which may sound like a cliche, but now we have research on this. And we know that, you know, they've asked many people, do you feel part of something that's bigger than you? Like it could be your family, it could be your country, it could be humanity, it could be the universe, it could be God, whatever. And the people who had a stronger sense of being part of a greater whole were happier and healthier. And during the COVID era, I think it could be seen very clearly that some people prefer to think about themselves and their own survival. And many other people instead realized that whatever happens to me happens to probably to many other people. If I get infected, I could infect some other people, and the infection could go on to the rest of the world. And it was a very harsh way of learning that we're all part of one same organism. And I don't know if we learned it. Probably many people did learn it, but I'm not so sure. And that is one of the tasks. So
I was thinking, go ahead. I was thinking, just to follow on what you're saying, Piero, again, coming back to Thich Nhat Hanh, who has taught what he calls interbeing, that we inter-are. And in some ways, waking up from the nightmare, which is the title of our talk, I think one of the waking ups would be to let go of the isolated concept of the individual as separate from everybody else, and begin to cultivate what you're talking about as we are part. And there are cultures that live this. Sort of Native American cultures are much more close to this experience of interbeing. But I think what you could do, just very practically, is if that experience of interbeing is stored in the soul, so to speak, and maybe the soul is knocking on the door, Diana, or tearing down the building, so we can get to that, then people must be having that experience. And so we working with people, I think we could reconceive what we're looking for. We're not looking for so much of this individual experience, spiritual soul awakening with qualities. We're looking at some communitarian or interbeing, whatever the words would be, moments when people are having that experience. It breaks through, and then make room for it. Then prioritize it and say, tell me more about that. What was that experience you had when you realized what you're talking about, Piero, that we are inter-are in terms of COVID? So that you would even shift how you work with people to be looking for that experience rather than some more individualized, isolated, self-growing place. And, I'm thinking about in the introduction of Roberto's book, he talks about a new civilization. We're all moving toward a new civilization characterized by kindness, harmony, and the spirit of synthesis. Well, I think the experience of interbeing, which is latent in the soul, we could make it more explicit and support it. And that would be a contribution at this time.
I was thinking about how someone was asking about how do you do this? We're talking about it, but how do you wake up from the nightmare? And for me, again, it's pure essential psychosynthesis. We've talked about how important the I is, but Joanna Macy's work comes to my mind as well here about feeling our pain for the world and feeling our pain for what's happening. And to start by allowing ourselves to experience what is instead of running away from it, which is happening quite regularly in our society, that people take alcohol or develop ways of operating that desensitize them. We have to start with the pain and the suffering, with the reality of what is. And once we do that, in our model, we're disidentified from it. Once we can experience, we we can liberate ourselves from it. So again, it almost feels like a no-brainer to me that if we practice what we've built, that capacity, that muscle, as Asajoli called it, to reach the I-self connection and to travel up the dotted line, so to speak, which I think everyone that's seriously on a psychospiritual path is doing. We'll never get there. Of course, we'll never get there. And there'll be incredible moments of darkness and pain. And yet, we can do that. We can do that. We can face things and change them. For me, it has to start locally. Locally, whatever we can do within our power, within our capacity, within our life, the life that we live in, where do we express that interconnectedness that everybody's talking about is so important? Andrea, I'm sorry, you wanted to speak.
Absolutely okay. My sense is that yes, of course, we must first enjoy the nightmare fully, and that's the first part, because there is to avoid, to deny. All the mechanisms of defense are present in the individual and in the collective. Very practically, I think that we have to go to work where psychosynthesis is not present. I mean, when you start a program with the teenagers, Diana, it was not present there. No, this way of looking at it. When I enter in a prison or I work with prisoners, I don't need to speak of psychosynthesis. I just try to stay with the finding the story and writing a better story. No, to stay with the model of writing. I think that what we have to do is really to improve extremely social psychosynthesis, looking for the place in which is totally absent. Even I was very, of course, this is not a new thing, but when I found myself working in big companies like L'Oreal, I was surprised to see that it was really water on a dry ground. And it was in a place in which it was needed. The slums in Kenya, it's needed there. And we must, if we are, let's say, open enough, skilled enough to find the translation of what we do, opening to receive from the culture that we meet. For instance, I must say, when I worked in Nicaragua for Verso Foundation, we were working with educators who were, all of them, they were coming from the streets as street children. So they have been drug addicted at 6 years old, in the gang at 12 years old. And so they were the perfect teachers for finding the children in the street and to find them. And I found myself working with them, and I said to them the very first time, I said to them, look, if you survive it to drug, guns, police, poverty, you have so many skills that have nothing to teach you. You are extremely competent in leading your life. And then we worked together, and they were absolutely interested to this way of looking inside. And I have given some of the more incredible individual sessions with people who said to me, when they killed my 2 children, and I was at that time on crack and blah, blah, blah. And at certain point, I became too to say, yeah, that's life, and it works like every life. So I think that what we have to really find is to explore new territories, to go where people doesn't go. Of course, institutions are useful. The Institute of Florence has done a fantastic work. We teach psychotherapy, blah, blah. But then it's very interesting to go outside where nobody knows what we are talking about. It's even more fun, if you permit me to use this word. When I worked with the prisoners, one day worked 2 years with a group, and one day one of them asked, "Is it difficult to work with us for you? Some killers, some." I said, "Not at all. It's very difficult to work with a group of psychologists." That's difficult.
Andrea, you're talking about the importance of the work and being very present, and how bringing a psychosynthesis attitude, and Diana, I know that's what you speak about as well, bringing the attitude of a psychosynthetic approach is really helpful in meeting everyday people of our planet in different contexts and shapes, and maybe not even using the language of psychosynthesis, but really getting real about the meeting. Andrea, in our discussions coming into this conversation, you spoke quite with energy about letting go of illusions. And I wonder if you can say a little bit more. We've got about 12 minutes before we do the Q&A. I wonder if you can start that and hand it out to esteemed colleagues.
The biggest illusion is to be in control of our life. And we have learned that that's an enormous illusion. And sociology speak of identifications, and we can speak of useful identification that we use for a certain time, that we are useful to meet people, whatever. But the big illusion is, and here I use Buddhist concepts, is the idea of permanence. Life is totally impermanent, and separation. Life is interdependent. And reconnecting with what Tom was saying and mentioning, quoting Thich Nhat Hanh, I remember a fantastic book from a veteran from Vietnam who were really at the bottom of life and become a student of Thich Nhat Hanh, and then he went to teach meditation in Bosnia during the war, because he was really qualified for that, having been war. I think that the title of the book, it was Once I Was a Soldier. No, that's my idea. Go beyond the illusion.
I just want to mention that Assagioli said that the energy of conflict is the energy of synthesis. And I think that's a very wise phrase that applies to waking up from the illusion. Because when we're identified, when there is an illusion, life doesn't let us continue with it for very long without something coming in that's going to shake us up and shake that identification up and give us the opportunity to let go of the illusion.
I would say that an illusion that we suffer from as a species is that we're superior. Superior and dominant. And if we're going to achieve express species maturity and come to live on a sustainable planet, we need to let go of that illusion. We are not. We have capabilities, but we have responsibilities, but we are not separate and dominant and special. And that's really a species-wide illusion. And you see people waking up all the time and realizing this, particularly in the younger generation. But we also see in this country, and I think you have it in Europe, kind of digging into the illusion that, well, we or white people or whatever are superior, are separate, and that is a nightmare. So I just think at that level, we are under the illusion, we're under the illusion that we're separate and superior. That needs to go.
Big time.
Big time.
The illusion that I have been waking up gradually, but certainly not totally, is that the illusion that we are all more or less the same. And I would say that my whole 50-year career has been in a way about that, about seeing how in visiting people's inner worlds, how different they are from me and from each other. And there's no day in which I don't notice that, even in people that are close to me and that I think I know. And that happens with the cultures. I agree with Andrea when he said that psychosynthesis can work and be understood and received in different cultures. And I've also had experiences in other cultures where I felt like it was in a different planet, that it was really a different world, and I had to work hard to understand that world. And that is very humbling. I remember, for instance, when I visited Japan, I always felt close to Japan. I had studied Japan's philosophy and Japan's psychology. I thought I knew, but I didn't. And I remember how astonished I was when I was conducting a workshop and I was saying something that I thought was funny, and people were very serious and they were taking notes. And then at some other time, I was making some jokes or saying something that I thought, some other times I was saying something very serious, and people started laughing. And it was quite eerie, and that is one of the occasions in which I understood how different we all are and how hard we have to work to understand each other better. That's not a given. We have to work hard, and it's one of the tasks of all people. It's the psychosynthesis of nations. That was one of the tasks that Roberto left behind, and nobody has yet done a full job on it, because it's an incredible difficult task. We'll see who will tackle it.
You know, what you're saying, I had this experience in going to Russia in the 90s. I was terrified. I had been indoctrinated in the 50s by the Cold War to fear. And I had to deal with massive fear just to get on a Russian train and go to Moscow. And I had to deal with that fear all the time. I think the last times I went, it had abated somewhat, but that fear kept me separate. And I had the experience of what you're talking about is, well, there were two things. Actually, the Russians they didn't know a thing about psychosynthesis, but they loved these ideas. They were hungry for them. So that was a wonderful realization. And but the most important thing to me was in moving through that fear, what I found on the other side was very, very, very deep friendships and love, that we were able to find each other across that huge barrier that existed. And those friendships with the Russians are still very precious and deep. And so it's paradoxical. Like if you're willing to bear the difference, the interbeing happens. And they both have to be there. You can't just get interbeing and smile at each other. You do just what you're talking about. But if you bear that, then the connection is there. And in my case in Russia, it's just a marvelously unexpected and deep connection that I have with those people that I worked with. And to some degree with the culture, which is still strange to me, and I'm still a little afraid of it. I'm not talking about the government, I'm talking about the culture of Russia.
Yes, I think that stereotypes here are the big problem. I shudder when you were talking about Russians, how Russians are represented in movies, for instance, that totally misrepresents a people. I had a wonderful experience there. My heart was all active all the time. It was amazing. It was totally different from any stereotype that I had in mind. And I think stereotypes are one field in which it would be very fertile to work. Stereotypes of national stereotypes, stereotypes of men and women, of old people and young people. We all have expectations of how people are and should be, and that we use labels. Our mind, our brain is programmed to use labels, but they do a lot of damage, and sometimes they are at the root of wars. And it all begins in our mind.
Well, there was a program, WISE, founded by Marian Feldberg, who put together young people from all over the world. It's still going on. It's already 25 years that this program is working with Andrew McDowell and other people. And it was so interesting to work about prejudice in that context. So you touched the head of a Nigerian boy, and this is not okay for someone, and it's okay, and it's a normal gesture for another. So we had to work a lot about this. This what about prejudice? It's true. A program and prejudice gives some safety, no, a feeling of safety. Then they become an identification. Then they become a problem.
It's been a very interesting conversation that I think needs to be continued. And I'm going to pick up on this point as part of a summary that Molly Young Brown brought in about a Western viewpoint of supremacy. And I think that as we travel through these answers, it would be really great to bring in the non-dual. And Andrea, the work of WISE is certainly heartfelt and really important. But I think tonight, overall, what we've been looking at is a learning. We started looking at a learning and a teaching philosophy, and that life, each of you have expressed in different ways a wall that you've faced, where you've needed to reconsider, perhaps move away from, in order maybe to disidentify from psychosynthesis, in order to be able to see the bigger picture. And it seems quite incredible that after 40 to 50 years, you have found a place where the living model gives more freedom. Yeah.
You know, just to speak to that, Kim, but just before we go to the questions, I think what's helped me is to make the distinction between the spirit of psychosynthesis, or the vision of it, as really a view of how human life works at all levels. A lot of it hasn't been differentiated yet, as Piero was saying, and then any particular technique that might be called psychosynthetic. I think if we disidentify from having to have certain techniques and stay rooted in the spirit and the vision, then actually, as Diana has said, the technique we need comes in the moment. We make up a technique. And Roberto was very clear about that. He says, you could make up techniques on the spot. So to me, the reason I'm still here is not because I got affirmed in particular techniques or whatever. It's because from the very beginning, there was a root that went into a vision for people, for the world, for the planet. And I'm still totally connected to that root. So that would be to the younger generation, go for it, guys. You know, you've got a big world out there. Stay rooted in the vision, and you will find out what you need to do and what techniques to use, basically.
There's a consensus. I know, Andrea, you spoke earlier about the difficulty of disagreeing with each other, but I think there's a real consensus that the root of psychosynthesis is about what you've discovered is that meeting a person in the place of exactly where they are brings forward, illuminates a different conversation, a new kind of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
There's also this question of, again, going back to the how do we free ourselves from the illusions of, and I'm sorry, maybe I harped on about this last time as well, but to me, it's so important to, if we are what you, Tom, call experiential presence, if we're experientially present with the here and now, with this moment of our lives, what we need to do to free ourselves will present itself. Right. And when you talked about trusting psychosynthesis, that for me is just that we don't have to figure it out. And there's no right answer. And, you know, when you go into the quantum field, it's not going to look the way you think it should look when you find your way in life or when you free yourself from the illusion. It's going to be unexpected, and it's going to be surprising, and it's going to be right under your nose. And this is something that has struck me about every step forward I've taken in my life has been from just looking at what's right in front of me. And that to me is an answer to waking up from the illusion.
There are so many possible ways to go here. I would like to pick up on what Leah and Michael Volde asked about. Could Piero expand a little bit more about the theme of beauty, and maybe more practically about how can we, because beauty this is something that I hear a lot from listening to people from the climate change and environmental and the systems shift. People are often talking about reconnecting to the beauty of the planet, the beauty of life. And how can you elaborate that? How we can make that happen in a bigger scale beyond the normal regular client work we do, etc.
Well, remember, one of our laws of the psychological laws is whatever we pay more attention to will grow in us. So if we decide to pay more attention to beauty, beauty will grow in us. A practical way of doing that is keeping a diary of beauty in which you write any kind of experience of beauty you have. It could be moral beauty, it could be music, it could be a movie, it could be a face, it could be something that's usually seen as ugly. Beauty comes to us as a surprise. It is usually unexpected. And so we have to be ready for when it comes, because then it flies away very quickly and we cannot own it and we cannot catch it. So it's a matter of waiting and seeing when it happens, and it will happen. And of course, we can multiply the occasions, because nature is the #1 source of beauty. And when have you, for instance, last looked at the starry sky? And when have you been in a forest or near the sea? And to be able to make the time for that, and it's always rewarding if we can do it. And I think we can do it a little bit more than we think. And moral beauty is always there. Luckily, moral beauty is, the beauty of courage, the beauty of humor, the beauty of serenity, of the beauty of kindness. We can see it all around us if we just look. So beauty is there, and luckily I can hear more people talking about it, as you were mentioning, than in the past. I predict, I don't like to make prediction usually, but I predict that people will be talking more about beauty in the next years, because it's one of the ways to save ourselves. Very easy way to save ourselves.
Another place of beauty that I write about in Holy Fire is the moment when you're with a client and he or she is in touch with a deeper presence of who they are. They become beautiful. And the beauty is right there. And it's not cosmetic beauty. It's not superficial beauty. It's the suffusion of the soul coming into the face and into the body. And that's a moment that you can mark and welcome and affirm. And the person then can feel what it's like to have that inner beauty coming forward in the situation. I've seen this happen in groups too, where a group is at a very profound moment of connection. I often will say, stop, look around, see how beautiful each of you are. And that's a really marvelous moment. So let's not forget soul beauty. It's right there.
Maybe David, can you briefly come in?
Yeah. Okay, well, it was using the example of this global meeting tonight. How is the internet, Zoom, and the like speeding up and intensifying the interconnectivity of us all? And that we're exponentially speeding up on a variety of levels, but there's a desire. There seems to be the polar opposite of the desire and need to slow down. So it's a kind of a paradox in some ways. But what's the panel's experience, with the, I suppose, with the benefit of the your age and that, how would you frame it for us?
I just think of Roberto saying, go slow to go fast. He's talking about that same paradox. I think what I do is just make sure that I have times of being and sitting and singing and looking at art and enjoying the things that nurture me and that, in a sense, slow me down. And I would say it's a balance, because I wouldn't, if I were just doing those things, it wouldn't be, I am moving faster than I ever had from what you're saying, David, with the internet, but I'm practicing keeping the balance. So I'll work for a while, then I say, I'm going outside and I'll sit for half an hour, just looking at the mountain and the whatever. So I think my response was, I try to find in myself the balance that I can keep.
Let me say a few things, because I think our sense of time is inborn. It's quite difficult to change that. For instance, I am an impatient person, and I've always been impatient. And Roberto once thought that I was in a hurry and I was making a fuss. And he told me, why's all this fuss? We are in eternity. And he was making fun of me and pointing the way. I think the way to work with the perception of time is to disidentify from time. Time belongs as a mental structure, and if we're able to disidentify from our mind, we will be able to experience timelessness. Perhaps it will be just passing, but it will happen, and that, I think, is a great help for all the people who are in a hurry. The subject of time is immense. I don't want to take more space on it, but it's a big chapter. It's a big chapter.
What do you think, Diana?
Well, I was just thinking as Piero was speaking about how I slow down, and I slow down by experiencing and seeking out my interconnectedness, whether it's with nature, whether it's with other people. I've chosen to live in a spiritual community and an eco-village, and all of this has dramatically changed my sense of my interconnectedness. And alongside that, even in the work with the young people that we do, we take young people into nurseries, and young people become a mentor to a vulnerable small child. And I watch these deprived kids who have had no positive role models in their entire lives. I watch them become interconnected to that little person. And that is all there, no matter what our human condition is. Very near the surface is this interconnectedness and this learning through finding beauty through our interconnectedness. And that's my way of slowing down. And it's not very slow, but it's very interconnected. It's a very good feeling.
That sounds wonderful.
I don't think it's a question of slowing down. It's when it's presence or not presence in the moment. I mean, we have been talking, I think we're nearly to the end, but I see the time passing by. No, I realize now that 2 hours are nearly over. When we are present in what we like to do, it's a different sensation of the time. It's a different feeling of the time. It can be even going fast. No, you were remembering, Tom, the sentence. As Jolly said, festina lente, go fast, slowly. It's a bad translation, but the concept is this. So, for instance, when we are in a session, maybe we have, if we lose the connection with the moment, then we become to be in a hurry. So it's more about the presence than the rhythm.
Well, yes. And sometimes minutes I don't know if you ever had that experience. Minutes seem like centuries.
Yeah.
Do you ever have that? And then there's another minute, and then there's another minute, and there's another century. I'm in the now, but still time is passing very slowly. What's the matter now? Did somebody slow time down? I don't know if you've had that.
Does that have to do with impatience, Piero?
It certainly does.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, though, I'm in good company because Jolie also told me once that he was also feeling impatient, that the world was going too slowly.
And to use that as a segue to just recognizing that we have a few minutes left of our time together tonight, and also connecting to the fact that many people are saying that this world is in a hurry. We as a species might be in a hurry to take care of the situation we have created. So a few final words from each of you as a send-off to us, the coming generation practitioners. A few words each.
I just hear Pastor Jolie saying, I think to us when we were there, have confidence in your soul, not your personality. So I would say to you, as I would say to myself, gain and trust and confidence in who you are and work with the rest.
I cannot tell you anything, Eric. I'm sorry, I don't have enough time.
No.
I would need a few hours to answer your questions.
And we just had 2 hours asking the question, so thank you so much, Piero.
I can answer short. I would say that you trust that you are fundamentally all right and wonderful and beautiful simply because you exist. Punct. Full stop.
Beautiful.
And to my young colleagues, I say that we are doing a fantastic work. It's so enjoyable. And the more we go on, the more it becomes interesting to work with people.
Thank you so much.